In 2024, there were over 592,000 sewage spills across the UK. It's a mad amount of untreated sewage going into our environment.
Hello and welcome to Green Queens,
the perfect podcast for imperfect environmentalists.
With myself, Abby Dewhurst, and herself, Imogen Bogle.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm all right, mate. How are you?
Really well, and also very excited to be doing this because we've been out and about doing lots of podcasts here, there and everywhere.
I know.
And we haven't sat down and caught up like this for a little bit of time. So I'm very excited.
I'm very excited as well. And I'm very excited to chat to this particular guest today. Dani Jones. Is her surname Jones? I should know that.
Jordan.
Dani Jordan. We'll do that bit again.
Okay.
And I'm very excited to chat to this particular guest. Dani Jordan, who is, hang on, let me get her actual official title, Director of Campaigns and Communities at Surfers Against Sewage.
And we should say we have just had the conversation.
Yeah.
We've literally just hung up and
I lied in that little I'm excited to chat to. That was me acting. How was it?
Nailed it.
Thank
we
you.
We really should have a point of view. Do we talk about this in anticipation or retrospectively?
I don't bloody know.
Well, we'll just shake it up each time.
Yeah.
But what was amazing is that we finished the call. So rewind. Surfers Against Sewage, for those who are not aware, huge campaign organisation campaigning for improved water quality, both in terms of sewage pollution, but also plastic and chemical pollution as well. And they've been going for 35 years.
Yeah.
But what was absolutely astonishing, we finished the call. We'd had a wonderful conversation. There are so many juicy nuggets in there.
Yeah.
But Dani revealed to us that her last working day, so we're recording this on Monday, on Friday afternoon, she was litter picking with none other than King Charles. So, Abby, what's she done?
She's gone from a king to a queen. But what's great is that we'd stopped recording at this point and we were like, sorry, we managed to chat to you for 43 minutes. I name dropped Deborah Meaden in there and she didn't even think to just shoehorn King Charles in. So amazing that her last working day was with King Charles. And then the first thing she did on her next working day was the Green Queens podcast. So what an honour to be within the same calendar month.
Well, quite. And, you know, this conversation I think is a special one because for those who are like, oh, I don't surf, this isn't relevant to me.
Yeah.
It is relevant to you because water impacts all of us. And I think there are some fabulous lessons about how we deal with any kind of environmental issue, actually, not even an environmental issue, any kind of campaign.
Yeah.
And how to make it resonate with the most amount of people and to also go beyond political party lines. So
yeah, and this isn't where her career has started and ended as well. Like Dani has worked in this, you know, she's worked in water use and water management. She mentioned WWF. Yeah. So, you know, huge amounts of experience and expertise in this field. But what I loved about the chat with her is that it didn't come across that way. You can tell she's knowledgeable, you can tell she knows what she's talking about, but she never answered a question in a way in which it felt like she had been working in this industry for many, many years. She did it in a really like approachable, understandable way. And I felt like I could ask any question, which I don't always feel like I can do.
And the last thing I'll just say is that throughout this conversation, given that we're talking in particular about sewage at points, it's really tempting to bring out a few puns or to laugh at certain things that are accidental puns. So if you hear any sort of muffled titters, that's what they are.
That's what they are. And I think if there was ever an episode that I was allowed to say shit in, it was this one, and I do. So warning if you're listening beneath the age of, what's an appropriate age to say shit, do we think?
Oh,
as non-parents, I was going to go 13, but a parent listing is probably going to be like, what?
I mean, probably the correct answer is one should never swear, and we have better words we could use. However, sometimes it is quite fun.
Current state of our waterways is a bit of a shit show, so
yeah. And I think that brings our shit count up to 10 in this episode. We'll find out at the end.
Yeah, we certainly will. Message us, comment below, do whatever you need to do to let us know how many shits you heard in this episode of the Green Queens podcast.
Shit.
Enjoy the chat with Dani because we absolutely loved it. And we did say there's this huge report coming out very, very soon. So we need to get her back on for sure and find out how... I was going to do it again. Don't do it again, Abby. You've got better words. Just find out how that report goes.
Let's meet Dani. Dani, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast on this wonderful Monday morning that we're recording. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. It is really great to be here.
I guess first things first, for those who might have been living under a rock or have no idea, can you tell us what is Surfers Against Sewage and why do you exist?
So Surfers Against Sewage started in 1990. So we've actually just had our 35th birthday bash. We had a party on a headland in Cornwall. It was amazing. But started in 1990 by a small group of surfers who were literally sick of surfing in sewage. So started really by a really small band of people actually fed up of this particular issue, got together, became a pressure group, and really were very successful very quickly in terms of bringing attention to the issue, and had some really good early wins. We find ourselves 35 years on, sadly, still working on the same issue in a different way. But we aren't just surfers, we're more than surfers. So we work with swimmers, surfers, kayakers, all water users, really, where people meet the water, whether that be in the river or at the beach or in the ocean, and working on pollution. So sewage pollution, plastic pollution, and we're starting to look at chemical pollution as well in those places.
Can you believe that 35 years on, this is still something that you're having to campaign for, but in a slightly different way?
I mean, it's really frustrating, isn't it? And I wish we weren't. And I think when you're in any sort of campaign and charity, really the idea is that you're putting yourself out of business. And the reality is that's probably not going to exist. Yeah. No, we don't want to exist. Exactly. We want this issue to have been sorted and there to be no need for us. But there still is a huge need for us. And actually, pollution of our waters in different ways is becoming more complex with the kind of different pollutants that we're seeing. But no, I mean, and there's lots of reasons why we're still seeing sewage pollution. There's kind of practical reasons. There's more of us in the UK than there was in 1990. So there's a lot more of us using water, flushing our toilets, more businesses. Climate change means we've got changing weather patterns. So we're seeing different rain, right? We don't see the good old British drizzle so much as you used to, a nice kind of consistent rain that just soaked into the ground. We see massive heavy rains and then periods at the moment, like we have at the moment, of less rain. So that overwhelms our systems. And then we have, particularly in the privatised water industry, decades of underinvestment in infrastructure and a preference to take out money and profit rather than actually build the systems that we need to properly handle our wastewater and our sewage and deal with these changes. Population change isn't new news. Climate change isn't new news. It's just biting now.
In terms of what has changed since the 90s, have we seen any improvement at all? Or have those combination of factors, climate change, more people, water companies not investing, has that sort of netted out any kind of potential improvement?
So there was improvement in the early days. So there were some big wins, and some of that was around the treatment. A lot of that was around the treatment of sewage at the coastline. So in a lot of places, you were just getting raw sewage kind of as standard, and that improved dramatically through the sort of 90s. And we see that in the bathing water classification. So that's how the government sort of classified places that we swim a lot, and most of those around the coast. And kind of that improvement across that time period, even to now. The problem is that we're dealing with different issues now. So we're dealing with a kind of consistent crumbling of infrastructure, kind of reduced maintenance, everything. So basically no money being put into looking after the infrastructure, putting in new infrastructure, and also kind of more innovative things we could do. Like, so there's something called catchment-based solutions, which is about if you imagine a river and all the water that runs off the land to a river, whether that be from farmland or from towns, keep holding water back in fields through things like SUDs. So there's like rain gardens and things like that. None of this has been invested in. So it's a story of just consistent failure to deal with what was a very obvious issue building up and has been building up for a long time. It's not new. And their blind eye was turned. And the real sort of, I think, turning point in this, having worked on this for a long time, and I worked on sewage pollution pre-COVID as well, COVID and the lockdowns and the boom in outdoor swimming and just general outdoor water use in all its ways, and people appreciating their sort of local green spaces, the nature they had around them, and then suddenly realizing, things are not how I assumed they were here. That's been the sort of the modern turning point in terms of turning that story into one that we as professionals knew about and were fighting about in the background, to one where the public suddenly were like, hang on a minute, this is not on, what is going on here? And that's our sort of modern story of the current sort of end sewage pollution campaigning.
And I think that's a really important point around, we have this conversation, Imogen and I are often in rooms full of people who already get it, like they already know a lot of this stuff, you kind of preaching to the converted. And so it's about now like reaching the wider audience, isn't it? And just gently being like, don't know if you are aware that this is actually happening. You mentioned that, it's been, our weather is changing. It's very, very hot and very, very dry. I'm actually in Yorkshire at the moment where there's a drought. And so I think people are spending more time looking for somewhere to cool down as well, which naturally then leads us to our waterways, doesn't it? And so I've seen you on BBC Breakfast and various media outlets, which are then all of a sudden going to start to appeal to a wider audience of people that perhaps didn't know that this was a thing. What do you say when you are sort of chatting to those real entry level, this might be the first time that people are ever aware of the fact that there is even an issue with our waterways? How do you explain that to people? What do you say is going on?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I say is actually, why should we as members of the public understand all of these systems and all of the problems that are out there, right? There's so much stuff going on. And I think particularly as a sort of, when you're a technical expert in something, you have this kind of instinct to be like, everyone needs to understand this. But I think as a member of the public, I don't have the capacity to understand all of these things. But sewage pollution in particular is obviously something that's come up, it's bubbled up, and it does have that sort of widespread sort of awareness across the public in the UK. Maybe not the understanding of why. So I guess in terms of what's going on with the system itself, we have in a lot of places in the UK what's called a combined system. So that means that the drains that our rainwater goes down are combined with the drains that are sewage and our sort of wastewater from our washing machines, from our shower and everything from our homes go down. They go together. This made sense when those were designed many decades ago. But now with the changing weather patterns, and again, the amount of housing, the amount of businesses, it is problematic that we have this, because what happens is, and to be honest, it's not always when it rains, but let's start with when it rains. We get heavy rainfall and that very quickly overwhelms that system. So you've got all of that rainwater, all of the sort of sewage and wastewater shooting down the sewage to the sewage treatment works. In theory, the sewage treatment works is going to treat your sewage. And then out the other end shoots sort of effluent, it's called. That's the treated kind of sewage. That is of a reasonable standard, again, in theory. And there's a lot here that you could unpick, because actually often that's actually probably not safe to swim near, even though that it's treated to the right standard. And that is returned to the environment, so often returned into a river. What has happened over the years is that water companies have been granted in exceptional circumstances, but the definition of exceptional has been loose. And we've seen kind of recent investigations by the Office of Environmental Protection, who are kind of regulate the regulators in England and Northern Ireland, them kind of saying actually they think that the definition of exceptional circumstances hasn't been correctly interpreted. But basically, you or I or any member of the public would say if it was exceptional, that would mean like the biggest storm, the most rain, might happen twice a year. I don't know, max. So on those occasions, the water company is allowed to open basically what's called a combined sewage overflow. So where it's too much is coming in, the sewage treatment works is going to get overwhelmed. They can basically let that untreated sewage, sort of wastewater and rainwater all out into the river or onto the sea without any treatment. The problem is that hasn't been happening in what any reasonable person would define as exceptional. That's happening. I mean, we saw something like over 400,000. Let me check my figures.
Well, I had a look this morning, and the Rivers Trust website that you can go on at any time and just have a look. So we're in a drought here in Yorkshire, and it has really not rained properly in the UK for weeks. And you click on the sewage map now, right now at this point, 9:35 on a Monday morning, mid-drought, mid-heat wave, and there are currently 33 water companies discharging sewage. And in the last 24 hours, annoyingly, I've got the little spinny circle thing, but I did check just before. In the last 24 hours, it was something like 3. There we go. Oh, discharging now. 40 are currently discharging. Yeah. And in the last 24 hours, 265 have been discharged in definitely not exceptional circumstances of rain. I'm not the expert, but I was under the impression that only happened in very severe rain.
No. So it happens with drizzle, it happens in dry situations, and they're called dry spills, and they're most definitely not allowed. Now, there's lots of excuses made for this. In 2024, there were over 592,000 sewage spills across the UK. That's confirmed, but actually, because we don't have much data for Northern Ireland or Scotland, we reckon the figure, if you project from the little bit of data that we do have about sewage in those places, probably closer to 1 million spills across the year, and that's for nearly 5 million hours. So that's the amount of time it's spilling. It's a mad amount of untreated sewage going into our environment for nature and for us. I've got to give a little plug to our Surfers Against Sewage Data HQ. We've got a super sewage map on there, and we also have an app as well, the Safer Seas and Rivers Service app. So if you are a water user and you want to know if there's been a spill near you, because the traditional wisdom, which is if it's rained, you might need to be a bit careful, doesn't always apply, as you've just kind of illustrated there. So the Safer Seas and Rivers Service app is a brilliant app which will tell you if there has been a spill near you, so you can make that informed decision. Because this is one of the things, a lot of this data is getting better now. We're seeing improvements, but for obvious reasons, the water companies haven't wanted us to know clearly how often they're spilling sewage, where and when and how long. And actually, as a water user, that is a real problem, because you want to know if you can go safe. I want to know. I swim in the Thames. I live in Surrey. Me and my kid, I've swum there since I was a kid. My granddad, I have really vivid memories of my granddad swimming down the Thames with a nose clip, just falling down the Thames. But I'll take my kids down there. It's a hot day, and there'll be 10s, 20s, sometimes hundreds of people down there with their kids splashing. I want to know. I mean, I say to my kids, keep your head out, keep your mouth shut. But they don't really do that.
And that's so sad. They have to.
Yeah,
exactly. And I want to know if they're safe or not. And it just, I just feel that we all share this feeling that we should be able to enjoy these places for all of us. And the thing is it's we know that there are barriers for different people accessing nature. But if we can access our beaches and our rivers and our lakes and enjoy them, at least that's one step. That's something that we can do that's ours and it's shared, and it should be for free.
And I think that is the really, really interesting thing when it comes to thinking about water pollution and sewage pollution, because people can conceptualize water. People have swum. People can conceptualize sewage. Everyone has been to the toilet. Like, those two things are so tangible to understand. And I think it's an easy thing for people to be outraged by, and so get behind it as a mission. But as we've seen water bills rise as well, suddenly there is this additional layer of outrage. And we've kind of started to touch on it a little bit about how water companies are behaving, and the number of times that they're using the combined sewage overflow systems at points in time when they absolutely shouldn't be. What is it that you're doing to kind of drive that more systemic change? And how could people listening to this podcast get involved, and what should they be asking for from the water companies who are treating these record fines as business costs, rather than recognizing them for what they really are? Or certainly that's what some of the commentary is saying.
Allegedly.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, in terms of what we're campaigning on right now. So I'll start there, and then kind of what people can do themselves. So there's different things in different places. So I sort of hinted earlier, Northern Ireland and Scotland are in a different situation. They aren't privatised water companies. And one of the main things in those places is very little data. So our kind of work in those places is all around actually transparency. We want to see more real-time monitoring of sewage discharges or spills so that we actually can know what's happening in those places. So no one can say everything's fine here, please look away.
Nothing to see here.
Yeah, exactly. All is well. So, because that's the start, really. It's the start for understanding situations. It's the start for kind of water user safety and for the natural environment as well. So in those two places, we're sort of behind the curve, I would say, because we really just don't know the situation. We suspect it's not good. In Northern Ireland, for example, we know that there's the investment that the water industry was, because one water company in Northern Ireland, the investment they were going to have, the government have taken away and decided to spend on something else. So a bad situation is undoubtedly going to be getting worse in Northern Ireland. So that's a sort of starting point. But the big focus for us this year and last year, it started last year with the general election. So feels like about 4 million years ago, but actually it turns out it was only last summer. We had a really big push for the general elections. We wanted to make sewage pollution and ending sewage pollution an election issue. We knew it had popular support from across the public, but we wanted to make sure that we got it into party manifestos, and we were getting whoever went into power. We now know who went into power, but at that time, there's no guarantees before that they were making promises before they went in. So, this work started 2 years before the election. We developed a sort of joint, we called it the End Sewage Pollution Manifesto, which was basically a joint kind of plan with lots of other organisations as well. So water user organisations, environmental organisations, campaigning groups, the WI, all getting together with these particular asks. So they were quite hard to sort of argue with. And then we went on this tour in our election tour bus. So when we kind of had to hustle for those kind of 6 weeks in the run up to the election, we had a double-decker tour bus, which was amazing. And the kind of tagline on the back was "Voters Against Floaters." And
this is so brilliant.
That someone just came up with that in a last-minute meeting, and you just think sometimes that's how the best ideas are. It was a bit of a spoof of a sort of, a political party tour bus. So we had a big number on the side, but our big number was the number of sewage spills the year before. And we took that all around the country, and we ran hustings events on beaches and riverbanks. So bringing political candidates to their potential voters and sort of getting them to answer questions and make commitments. And so then we had the election. And then, I'm sorry, this is going back a long way, but there is a thread here that makes sense to today. So we're really pleased. New government came in and made some really early commitments around, they brought through a water bill, which sort of dealt with some of the kind of bonuses and fines and some of those things which were really annoying. They're not the answer. It's not the root answer. But the fact that we're seeing people getting big bonuses when their companies, as far as the public concerned, are completely failing, just felt really, so aggravating. So, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, they weren't just kind of like normal bonuses. They were like astronomically huge. And I just can't even imagine being in that mindset to be like, dum-de-dum-de-dum, I've not done very well at my job, but I've got all this money. And so that
they had done well at that job by their measures. So this is the thing about why the system is so broken, because it all depends on what's the measure of your job, right? So we would say polluting the environment and making people sick means that you have not done well at your job. However, without knowing what's in these people's contracts and what their sort of incentives are, I would suspect that their incentives are much more around things like payouts to shareholders, very financial focused, and probably about delivering clean water to our houses that we drink as well. So, or are they? I mean, is any of it operational, or is it all financial? It's really interesting. But so the government sort of made some early moves on that. DEFRA's top priority, cleaning up our river, lakes and seas. Really happy to see that. And one of the things that we've been campaigning on in the run-up to the general election was a public inquiry. around this sort of scandal of sewage pollution. So they announced and launched an independent commission into the water industry. Not quite a public inquiry, but nevertheless, someone who's been given the job of really looking at what's going on and to come out with some recommendations, which the government could then act on. So that commission has been going on this year, and we're about to see the final report from that at the end of July, potentially the day before everyone goes off for summer holidays and stuff, and potentially in the school holidays as well, and then the day before the politicians go off for the summer as well. And our campaign has been very focused on that because that's been run by a man called Sir John Cunliffe, and basically trying to set out through direct channels. So we did an official submission to the commission. There was a kind of call for evidence, but then also obviously through campaigning. We ran a social media campaign called Dear John. So basically we asked people from across the our community of water users to send their videos in to say, basically, Dear John, this is why I need you to make sure that we see transformational change of this system, that please don't just tinker around the edge. And because we can send in our really technical, beautifully written, and it was, submission around what different water systems around the world look like, why the kind of finance, the way that the water sector is financed and managed are the root of the problem, and why you need to change that. But alongside that, as campaigners, it's really powerful to be telling that story in a way that isn't quite so technical. So we ran this social media campaign, Dear John, and it reminded me, because obviously a Dear John letter is a breakup letter, right?
Yeah.
So I'm a bit like, we might have to follow it up with Dear John at the end of July if the report is disappointing. Bring those voices in, just bring it home what actually this pollution means to people, what it's doing for people's lives, for their mental health, for their well-being when they can't go and enjoy these places. People love their cold dips. What it's doing to whole towns and economies in places where tourism is being impacted. As a town on the coast, you don't want your beach red flagged, basically telling people don't go in the water. That happens a couple of days across the summer. People are going to choose not to come. None of this is remotely acceptable and has real life impacts. So we really wanted to sort of share that. So we await the final report. I mean, you've got to be hope and optimism always, right? Change is possible, change can happen. But we do also know change is hard. I've worked on this for a long time. So we'll see. It feels
we could be at a real exciting turning point, in which case we need to get you back on the podcast immediately to go over that report when it comes out. But I guess you mentioned a couple of things there. You gave examples of where it's working better in other parts of the world. Can you give an example of what that looks like? Is that privatization is no more? Because is that been the root of the problem, do you think?
So there's lots of different kind of models that you see. Even within the UK, we have different models in the 4 nations of the UK. As I've sort of suggested, that none of them are necessarily a shining light of success in terms of sewage pollution in particular. And you see different models, like if you look across to, for example, Europe, obviously there's a big campaign as well about kind of to renationalise the water industry. Yeah. But there are sort of middle ground options as well, where you kind of have a more democratic kind of, you have people involved in decision making. You don't have just shut boardrooms with people making lots of money making decisions, where you can prioritise public and environmental health, where you have regulators that actually are really tough and really independent to make sure that the slide that we've seen over the last decade into the behaviour that these water companies seem to think is acceptable is astonishing. And I know lots of people who work in Ofwat, in the Environment Agency, doing brilliant work, but overall, as a kind of entity, the regulators have been not very well funded, but also haven't had enough teeth. They've let these water companies get away with, destroying our environment, right? It's not at all acceptable. And then around transparency as well. So for us, we've been kind of campaigning around principles of a new system. We think there's lots of different options, across the spectrum, but really focusing particularly around the power of money in this system, because in the end, it's the money that is driving the behaviours. We speak to whistleblowers in water companies who talk about sort of green lighting boards. It's basically saying literally everything's okay here. That's the culture, so that they can get their money, they can get their bonuses, they can make sure they're getting the dividends for shareholders. And it's, unless you deal with how money is basically creating this system, this really broken system, it's not going to change. So, you can't have investors who want to come in and just basically raise loads of debt off, or, you just can't have that. You have to have, if it's going to be private money, it has to be sort of long-term patient investment. I mean, water companies are monopolies. We all need water. These are brilliant investment opportunities, right? But the way that it's gone since privatisation in the 90s this was certainly, I don't think, anyone's intention, but mistakes have clearly been made along the way. And it needs a serious reset at this point. And I mean, if I was going to feel pessimistic, which I try not to, my worry would be that the report that we're going to see from the Commission at the end of July will sort of tinker around the edges, but still leave that sort of, because it's like the sort of rotten heart at the middle. Unless you deal with that rotten heart at the middle of this industry, we're not going to see the change we want, and we're still going to be talking about this in 5 years' time. So
do you think, because I know that you have a background in behavioral science, and what we're really talking about here is like this huge systemic change that's required at an organizational level in order to kind of see that real world tangible change. And to get that systemic change, it kind of first needs to start with a huge mindset shift from the individuals within these companies, and to recognize that this is an issue. And it seems absolutely astonishing that it's not regarded as an issue, because they are dealing with the water that probably their families are using and swimming and drinking in, and how they're not sort of making that link it just kind of blows my mind. But if you could kind of bring all of those water company execs together and just have a little word with them, what would you say?
I mean, I suppose I think the important thing, and you sort of hint at there as well, is to sort of split out some of the, again, because we know that we're seeing people who work for water companies who are just getting grief when they're out, fixing stuff, and that's not the answer. Right. No. That is not remotely okay. These are people just going to work and doing their job, and actually that job's really important, because we all want water coming out of our taps, and we all want our toilets to flush, and that kind of thing. So, but the decision makers, the people at the top, the ones who are really coining it in as well when it comes to all of this, I don't know, because I do think that for me, it's about how their kind of business model is set out to define success and how they are personally incentivized. So having worked in and around water companies for much longer than I would like to admit at this point, I don't think persuasion is the answer here. This isn't you can't go in with a good idea to a water company and say, look at this great idea, because it won't happen. My kind of experience with water companies started right back when I used to work on water efficiency, and I used to work on supporting water companies to run good campaigns to engage their customers with water efficiency. Now, very long time forward, I think that's starting to happen better, but it's so difficult because actually they just fall back to what they know, that sort of usual thing, and what their priorities are. So I'd love it if a nice, good word would work, but I actually don't think this is a situation of persuasion, unfortunately. I think that the building blocks around them need to be moved, and you probably need to see, particularly in the boardrooms, you need to see a change, a massive change. I mean, we would love to see we'd love to see customers represented. We'd love to see the environment represented.
God forbid.
Just in this decision-making processes. So I feel like you need a real switch up in who is in the boardroom and who's making those big decisions.
It's so interesting, Imogen. I hadn't really thought about it until you mentioned it there. But the people at the top who are making this, these huge bonuses, they are living a life that we can absolutely not relate to, and they have access to things that we absolutely would never even dream of seeing, let alone experiencing. but they do still swim in the same sea and they still flush the same loo and they still, flick on the tap and get access to the same water. Like, they're not getting some special, magic water here that means that they don't actually have to worry because it's not impacting them. It literally is also them swimming in shit and their children swimming in shit. So it is mental that they don't seem to care. Like, the fancy, the huge great bonuses and salaries isn't buying them an extra level of luxury to avoid this. So it's mad.
Unless they've got some super duper 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 fancy filtration system in their own household, which I'm sure that lovely bonus can absolutely afford.
But it doesn't filter the sea, and they still like to swim in the sea. So anyway, I don't know why. It just literally dawned on me there. I also want to address that. I've listened to quite a few climate related podcasts. I've done loads of driving over the last few days, and so in the word of research, I felt quite anxious and overwhelmed, to be quite honest with you. And this can feel quite anxious and overwhelming, and also one of those real, like, oh my god, it's so out of our control and it's so terrifying. And so to try and bring it back and bring some light, you said that you're an optimist, Dani. What do you think that the day-to-day person can be doing if this is something that is really making them feel a bit overwhelmed?
Yeah, because I didn't quite get to that bit, did I? So I think that, there's a couple of things. So one of the things that we can always do, we can always talk about what we can do as sort of responsible citizens, and I'll come to that. But I don't think we should ever come to that as our first and foremost, because actually we all live within a system, and it's the system that needs to improve or change around us. So the commission report that we're expecting at the end of July, what happens after that is that goes to the government, and the government then decide how they want to take that forward. And we're expecting a kind of new legislation, new laws around that in 2026. So our attention then switches to our political representatives in terms of making sure that when that goes through Parliament and it's being debated, that our political representatives, so we've all got them wherever we are, know how much we expect them to make sure that is really stretching. So we are currently running a sort of digital email your MP kind of action, and that's a first step. So this is a first step in terms of kind of just warming MPs up, or whatever your political representative is, depending on what country you're in, to say, I really care about this and I expect you to act on it. And I mean, I mentioned earlier that we did hustings around the country. We know that a lot of these people were elected based on promises that they made. It doesn't maybe feel as important as some of the other issues we're facing as a country, but if you're living in a coastal location, actually it's really important to you, or on a river that you love. And, so promises have been made to fix this system. So there is this kind of, it's always worth using your voice, is what I would say. First of all, you have a voice and you have power. You are a voter and your vote matters. And that means that they either want your vote in a future election or they want to keep your vote. So use your voice. Make sure you're sort of hassling your MP, making sure, in a lovely way, of course, a productive and constructive way. But it makes a difference. It really does. And if you're not sure how to do that, there's lots of places that can sort of help you to sort of get in touch, build your skills, those kind of things. We'll be looking to do a lot more in-person, in-constituency engagement sort of as the year goes on and as we move towards that sort of next water bill. So that'd be my first thing. Please always use your voice. You do have power. You might think you don't, that your one voice doesn't matter, but it absolutely matters on all of these issues as well. Climate, wider nature issues, sewage pollution. And then in your home, I mean, there's kind of, in terms of, because sewage isn't the only thing we work on. We also work on plastic pollution and chemical pollution. I think for me, plastic, again, we're stuck in a system that are just pumping out plastic at an unbelievable rate. But there are choices we can make as consumers. It is limited because there's a lot of stuff we just can't get unless it comes in plastic. In terms of reducing our plastic and responsibly disposing of it as well. We run a Million Mile Clean, which are beach cleans and kind of cleans inland as well, up and down the country, and the amount of stuff we pick up is crazy. So there would be that. And then for sewage and for water use generally, I mean, I'm sat here in another 30-degree day, so it's about kind of thinking about how we're using our water and what we're putting down our drains and down our loos, and just kind of giving that a second thought. But like I say, I think that for me, that's not ever where I'd start. I'd always start with this kind of system around us and making sure that it's working for us and for the environment.
A few weeks ago, we had Laura Young on the podcast, and she spearheaded the campaign to get single-use plastic vapes and debated in government. And she also spoke of the value of emailing your local MP, emailing your local councillor, and
that's actually how it all started.
Yeah, and I think that is such an empowering message, because we hear so much doom and gloom in the news, and so many of these issues feel like there's a couple of people up here in this sort of abstract place making core decisions, but actually we voted for those people, and we can reach them with persistent letters, conversations, and I think it's such a hopeful message for people listening to this to recognise.
It's so true. And I mean, we're seeing there's a really lovely campaign at the moment which is showing how many people want climate action, and it's by far and away the majority. And it's that people sit quietly and think, oh, I don't really know what I can do about that. So I just think kind of building hope and agency is always, so agencies in making people feel that they can act is always kind of at the heart. And so you talked about earlier about the kind of my environmental psychology. This is where this comes through for me, because I think one of the things in terms of our supporters as an organisation and the communities that we work with, that's at the heart of it. It's building that. Yes. So hope and kind of optimism, and then agency through skills and tools and opportunities to, make change where you are, and then more widely. When we did the general election campaign, one of the things I really just wanted to land for people was that actually the thing that you care about, sewage pollution, that is related to you voting. That was basically at the heart of a lot of the stuff that we did. So we provided people with little postcards which had some questions they could ask if anyone came and knocked on their door.
Great.
Because actually it's quite scary when you have a politician knocking on your door asking who you're going to vote for. You're a bit like, I don't know, a bit awkward, But actually to have some just questions to say, oh, actually, I really care about this issue, and I'd like to know what your position is on cleaning up my river here. And we provided people posters and that kind of thing. But we have this kind of, I don't know, there's a real dormancy in our how we interact with kind of these big moments, but also always. And that would be, I think, for me, at the heart of it. And it is hopeful, because I think we've got so much headroom for improvement as well, right? Just asking those questions. And it's not about being difficult, or rude. It's just about asking questions. Quite often, I'm quite often surprised that people do have an alternative option, or it's something you go back again and they've thought about it for the next time. So
I just want to quickly, we touched upon the sort of quality of your water coming out of the taps there, and there's been quite a lot of stuff that I've seen on social media around people all of a sudden fitting water filters, and I'll be totally honest, this is a question that my husband wanted me to ask. So thank you, Jake. Should we be doing that? Should we be concerned about the quality of water that is coming out of our taps in terms of drinking water?
So not an area of expertise for me. Obviously, I'm more concerned about how it comes out the other end. I mean, what I do know is, we talk about kind of making sure there are good regulators, but there is a really good regulator in the water industry here called the Drinking Water Inspectorate, and they are really, really well-functioning regulator.
Okay.
I don't personally worry about the water that's coming out of my tap, but as a kind of wider issue, I do know it is in the air. It's definitely a kind of conversation that. But I've got a friend, for example, who they've read things online. They've become worried about tap water, so now they're buying bottled water.
No,
exactly. So I do worry sometimes about that kind, the kind of unintended consequences of some of these things that people worry about.
I've just got to tell you this, because this is something that, should I ever become a parent, I am 100% stealing. But obviously, water in different parts of the country tastes slightly different.
Yes.
And so whenever we were going on holiday for like a staycation as a family, camping somewhere, my mum would turn around to us in the back of the car and be like, girls, we don't need to have any squash or juice on this holiday, because we're going to have holiday water. And we'd all be in the back of the car be like, yeah, holiday water. Oh my God, we're going to have Wales water. Genius move. And I still think about it now.
It's so true though. So I live in Surrey, but the Surfers Against Sewage office is in Cornwall, and I go down there regularly. But actually, I don't like the water down there because I've grown up with a taste of water here, which is really hard water.
Yeah.
And it's much softer down in the southwest. So I'm always a bit like, oh, it's tasting strange.
I've got one more question that I want to ask before we wrap up, because one of the things that I think points to the success of Surfers Against Sewage is that there are so many aspects of it that are just completely tangible to the everyday person. We've mentioned them: water, sewage, surfing, beaches, all of that good stuff. And being able to use that very tangible message to connect it to a broader kind of systemic issue. And when we look at kind of what's happening in the net zero conversation, it's becoming a little bit more divisive, a little bit more politicized. Things like renewable energy, it's just becoming a divisive landscape. And I wonder what advice you would give to anyone who's working on renewable energy campaigns, improving home efficiency campaigns, electric vehicle campaigns. What could they learn from your organization to drive those very, very successful campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a different issue. So, so I think the kind of, so I have worked on climate as well in a past job. So, but the thing about water quality, so pollution of waters, is it's such a local issue. People experience it, yes, as a general outrage, but they experience it where they are, on their beach, in their river. And so it's really, really tangible. And so the issue is tangible, but then any change of improvement also immediately tangible to them. So they can actually, we've got citizen science who water quality test, so they will know if things have happened. And I think often there are lots of experts in climate and net zero who would all agree that often climate issues end up a little bit up here, a bit ethereal. It's sad to see how things have kind of been dragged into a kind of more divisive conversations now. But I think, like with anything, it's about bringing things back to people's lives and what it means to them. So explaining, not all, again, I'll go back to my first point, though, is that not everyone needs to know everything either. So, and they don't have the time to know everything. But about kind of how climate is already impacting all of us already, but also the benefits to people, the direct benefits to people of these issues as well. It is a more tricky subject, because you can't point at the river and say, oh, look, that's cleaner now, or look, on my beach. So, we know that climate is affecting all of those things as well. I mean, it's deep in the issues that I'm working on. Plastic production is one of the main drivers of fossil fuel extraction going into the future. The heavier rain is a result of climate. And maybe that's how we need to talk about it as well. But I think for us, adaptation is also real. Like, is mitigation? Yes. But now, actually, we're not resilient in this country to climate change at all. And I think people are starting to feel that in different ways, whether that be heat waves, flooding, drought. So, it's just about bringing it home, I think. That's a long answer to say. All the ways that we can bring it home is the kind of the winner for all of these issues, whatever you're working on.
I think that's an incredibly powerful message, and I hope that people listening to this can recognize that think about things on a local level, but also the value of those using your voice, that you can start there, and that has more power than people realize.
And if anybody wants to find out more about Surfers Against Sewage, perhaps this is the first time that you've heard of this campaign, Dani, where can people find you?
So you can find us online, obviously, sas.org.uk. We're on all the social media platforms, and I would check out the Safer Seas and River Service app as well if you are a water user and want to know if it's safe to go in.
Perfect. And for anybody that's not watching this visually via the YouTube, very aptly, Dani has been sat in front of a surfboard that says clean and climate emergency. Is that right?
Ocean and climate emergency.
In my defence, the C and L and O is
amazing. And less aptly, I will say, you have the most fantastic pen, which is in the shape of a candy cane.
It might be a pen, it might be a snack.
This is what happens when you have children. I looked down. My choice were a candy cane or a purple. I mean, the purple's great, but these are my choices. is. So.
Well, Dani, thank you so much. This has been really, really fabulous. And it'd be great to speak again soon.
100%. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, thank you both. It's a real pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Green Queens.
If you did and you'd like to hear more, we'd be so very grateful if you could like,
subscribe, and join the Green Group Chat for weekly episodes.